Hello everybody, welcome to Pluto Politics. This channel is going to be a channel basically where I just talk about elections, campaigns, general political issues, and just all around. It's basically like a podcast where I'm just going to be talking about political stuff. We're just going to have some fun here. I'm going to talk about 2024, the election coming up literally in less than a week, and I'm going to talk about a bunch of other topics here. So if you want to please like and subscribe, it helps me out a ton, and it will keep me motivated to keep making these kinds of videos for you guys. In this video, we're going to talk about why I think Kamala Harris will win the 2024 election. Now, before I get all the Trump supporters coming into my comments telling me how wrong I am, I want you to know one thing about me. I'm going to be open and honest with you guys. I don't want to be like Ready to Politics or Let's Talk Elections, especially not like Let's Talk Elections, who tries to hide his biases that obviously he's a Democrat, he's a Democratic operative. And I don't want to be like Ready to Politics and straight up just lie about certain things that are going on. I want to kind of find a middle ground here, so I'm going to be open and honest about my beliefs. I voted for Trump. I am a Republican. I'm a registered Republican. I live in Western New York. I voted for Donald Trump in this election. I did. I do think, however, Kamala Harris will win this election. I don't believe it will be a landslide win for her, but I do think she will win the election. And if I had to bet money on it, right now I would bet money on Kamala Harris. So we're going to get into a bunch of different reasons why I think she will win the election. Let's first look at the polling data. As you can see here with the polls, Kamala led for most of August, September, and October. She led in the polls for most of it. Then Trump had a surge, right? And it's starting to like go back up a little bit. It's starting to trail back to Kamala here. Trump got to 0.4, and now it's starting to go back down. Again, Trump has a lead in late October, when you would say, oh, that's a good thing. He has a polling lead in late October. That's really good. But when did early voting start in this election? This early voting started about a week before. This is the period where voters tend to make up their minds. If you want proof, let's look back to 2022. In 2022, in the generic congressional vote, which is what I will be using, Democrats had a lead in September, and then it started to fizzle out a little bit in October. I believe that it is in September to October that is when the voters make up their minds. Now, you have to remember, in 2022, Republicans did win the generic popular vote in the midterm elections. But the reason why the election was bad for them wasn't because they won the generic congressional vote nationwide. It's because in the states that it mattered, they didn't perform very well. In Pennsylvania, the Republicans underperformed drastically. They underperformed their expectations. We were expecting an Oz victory in this election. Fetterman won, but he didn't just win. He won by almost 5%. To put it in perspective, he hadn't polled above 5% since September of that year. When we looked at the polls, we were expecting a close race. Fetterman blew Oz out of the water. When did Fetterman have a lead similar to his actual margin of victory in this election? September, October-ish, early October, and August. August, September, and October. If you took the polls from this far out in the election, you would have come up with the same conclusion, a Fetterman victory. Let's look at the Georgia Senate race. In the Georgia Senate race, you had Warnock leading most of the polls in August, a little bit of a slight bump for Walker in September, and then you had a tie for a little while, but then you had Warnock leading in most of September and October, and then quickly at the end of October, much like what we're seeing right now with the Trump surge, is that you had Walker gain a lead in the polling data. Again, when did Warnock lead the polls? It's during the period that I believe voters make up their minds. Late August to mid-October is when the majority of voters have already made up their minds and decided who they are voting for. Polling shifts in late October and November don't mean anything. They don't mean anything because the voters have already made up their minds. We look at the Nevada Senate race, and this one is a little bit of contrary. Laxalt led for most of September and October in the polling data. And then in late October, he had a slight dip, but then it went right back to it. This one, it must have been in August the voters made up their mind. August and early September, because that's when Cortez Masto had the lead. Now, you could just say Nevada polling is not the best, and that's true. Nevada has never been very good at the polls. They expected Trump to win in 2016. He didn't win there. But I would say that Masto had a lead in earlier on. I don't think that you should be basing what polls say now. I think you should be basing it on August, September, and October. Those months are super important, and whoever has the lead for the majority of those months is probably the favorite to win. I was expecting Laxalt to win the seat. A lot of people were, and he didn't. He very, very narrowly lost. But when you compare that with the Georgia Senate race, Warnock won on Election Day by only 0.9, but Warnock won in the runoff by a lot more than that. Fetterman won by 5%. Take a look at Arizona Senate race, Masters versus Kelly. Kelly was leading through September, through October, for most of the election cycle. We had a Kelly lead. And then on Election Day, you had the poll, or in October and November, you had the polls tighten up a little bit. Masters then took the lead, but who won that election? Kelly did, by the same margin that Fetterman won in Pennsylvania. So why am I saying this? What does this have to do with the polls now? Why does this have anything to do with the polling right now? But when you actually look at the polling right now, Trump had the lead in July, right? But look at the period I am talking about here, when voters make up their minds. August, September, October. Who has the lead? Harris. Harris has the lead in the national polling. We can do this for any state. We can look at Pennsylvania and Trump versus Harris. Look at Harris has the lead in September. Harris has the lead in October. Trump regains the lead a little bit, but for the most part, Harris had the lead. We look at Wisconsin in early October, late August, or September, and then early October. Harris has the lead. We look at the polls in Michigan here. August, Harris. September, Harris. October, Harris, until late October. Then it swings back to Trump. But even now, it's showing signs towards going to Harris. We can do this for literally any state. Here we have Nevada, September, Harris. For the most part, October, Harris. When the voters made up their minds, Harris was the leader. So I expect that trend to stay the same as it did in 2022. I expect voters to have made up their minds a few months before the election, and polls now or polls right before the election don't matter as much. I expect that trend to remain true, and I expect Harris to perform better in these states than I think a lot of people are expecting just because of the polls right now. I don't think the polls right now are an argument. I think you have to look at the polls for the majority of the months coming up before the election, and right now Harris was leading those polls then. Even though Trump is leading them now, I don't think that's the metric that we should be using, because when you look at 2022, that wasn't what happened. 2022, it looked like the Republicans were heavily favored to win. In 2020, it looked like the Democrats were having a massive surge. In 2016, it looked like the Democrats were having a massive surge. Those parties didn't win. Now, in 2020, obviously, Joe Biden won the presidency, but he barely won it. If we actually look at the map here, Joe Biden barely won the presidency in 2020. Wisconsin, 0.63%. Arizona, 0.31%. Georgia, 0.24%. Pennsylvania, 1.2%. He loses those states, which were decided by 3 of them, less than 1%. And then this one, a little over 1%. He loses the election. It is simple as that. He loses. It was a very close election. The Republicans won House seats in this election, and they almost maintained the Senate. It was a 50-50 split. If one runoff in Georgia had gotten the Republicans' way, they would be in control of the Senate from 2020 to 2023. That they would have been in control of the Senate. Now, I'm not here to say that polling is the best metric to decide elections. I actually don't think it is. I think polling is actually not a very good way to try to figure out who is leading in elections, as polling has had some of the worst numbers ever, has had some of the worst results ever. If you look at the 2020 polling, actually, let's start with 2013. 2013, all the polls said Hillary Clinton was going to win. Who won the election? Donald Trump won the election. 2020, all the polls said Biden was going to win in a landslide. It was extremely close. And we can even go to 2018, where polls said that Republicans were going to perform better. They didn't. The Republicans did not perform better. It underestimated Democrats, especially in the House. Now we look at 2022. It said that Republicans were going to do good. In 2022, polling at 538 said that Oz would win in Pennsylvania. It said that Laxalt would win in Nevada. It said that Walker would win in Georgia. Who actually won in those elections? Democrats, Democrats, Democrats. In some cases, it was by significant margins. Nobody expected Fetterman to win by 5%. People thought this election was going to be extremely close. Fetterman blew Oz out of the water. In Georgia, Warnock won by almost 3%. This is, of course, a runoff, but still. In Nevada, Masta won barely, but she still won. The party favored in these elections lost. In every election in the past 8 or so years, polls have been off in some way. Some way, shape, or form, the polls have been wrong. So what do the polls say now? What do the polls say in this election? The polls say Trump is going to win Pennsylvania. The polls say Trump is going to win North Carolina. The polls say Trump is going to win Georgia. The polls say Trump is going to win Arizona. The polls say Harris is going to win Wisconsin. Polls say Harris is going to win Michigan. Polls say Trump is going to win Nevada. While I do think that Trump is going to win some of these states, I don't think it will be enough to get him to 270 electoral votes. If we look at the early vote in these states, in the 6 battleground states, we get a clearer picture of who is likely to win this election. But first, let's fill out the map. We know that Harris is going to win Washington, Oregon, California, Illinois, Hawaii, New York, Vermont, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. We know that Harris is going to win those states. Certain, take it to the bank. We also know that Harris is going to win Maine's 1st district. We know that for certain. We can also probably put Colorado in this Harris safe state column. As for Trump's safe states, we know that he's going to win Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Nebraska. He's going to win Nebraska's 3rd district, Nebraska at large, and he will win Nebraska's 1st district. He will win Kansas. He will win Oklahoma. He will win Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Utah, Idaho. He will win Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Alaska, South Carolina, and let's say, for the sake of argument, that he will win Iowa, he will win Ohio, because we know he is extremely likely to win those states, and also let's just say he will win Texas and Florida. For the record, let's also give Harris New Mexico, let's give Harris Virginia, let's give Harris Maine at large, let's give Trump Maine's 2nd district, I forgot to do that, and then let's give Harris New Hampshire, because she will probably win it, Minnesota, because she will probably win it, and Nebraska's 2nd district, because she will probably win that as well. That leaves us with our 6 battlegrounds: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. These are not based on margins. I'm not even going to include the margins. We're just going to only include the margins for these states, because they're really the ones that matter. Yes, we can probably maybe take a look at margins in other videos, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is these 6 battleground states. Going into it, Harris has a lead. Harris has a lead over Trump currently when you only factor these states. So let's go over to the early vote data. In Nevada, right now, yes, it looks extremely good for the Republican Party. Extremely good for them. They are leading by 4 points. This is unheard of at the presidential level. Usually when we're talking about Nevada, we're talking about a Democrat firewall. Can the Republicans beat the Democrat firewall? We were talking about it in 2022. We were talking about it in 2020, 2016, 2018 even. We were talking about it in every election. Can the Democrats can the Republicans break through the Democrat firewall? Now, it's the Republicans that have the firewall. Let's assume Trump wins Nevada, because I think he probably will. And then let's go to Arizona. Right now, the Republican Party leads in Arizona by 8% in the early vote. In 2020 in Arizona, the Republicans were leading by 3%. That is a 5% gain for the Republican Party. The Republican Party gained by 5% in the early vote. Let's say for the sake of it that Trump will win in Arizona. In Georgia, the Republicans were leading in 2020 by 8% in the early vote. This was record numbers for early vote. Who won in Georgia in 2020? Biden did by 0.24. Republicans were leading by 8%. How much are they leading now? They are leading by 3% in Georgia. 3%. That is abysmal. But still, let's, for the sake of the argument, give Trump Georgia. Even though I don't think he is favored to win in Georgia right now, I think it is probably more likely Harris at the moment. Let's, for the sake of argument, give Trump the state of Georgia. Now let's talk about North Carolina. In North Carolina, the Republicans are leading by 1%. We go back to 2020 results in North Carolina. The Democrats were leading by 5% in the early vote. Again, this is a state that Biden or Clinton did not win. This is a state that Trump has never lost. I expect Trump to win in North Carolina. Trump has now 268 electoral votes. He needs to pick off one of these three: Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania. Theoretically, I guess he could also pick off Nebraska's 2nd district, but it is unlikely. It is very unlikely that will go for Trump. He now needs to pick off one of these 3 states. Let's go to the early vote data because it's the best metric we have right now to figure out what is going on in these states. In Wisconsin, the Republicans are down by 9%. We compare that to 2020 in Wisconsin. In the mail-in and early person ballots, the Republicans were up by 8%. That is minus 16% points. That is minus 16 to the Democratic Party. Harris right now is feeling really good about Wisconsin. Let's go to Michigan. In the early vote data we have in Michigan for 2024, the Democrats are up by 5. We compare that to 2020. The Republicans were up by 2 percentage points in 2020. That is a net loss of 7 in the state of Michigan. We will also be giving that to Harris. Polling data for Harris in Wisconsin and Michigan has her up as well. Now we look at the ultimate state here, the ultimate deciding state. We have Pennsylvania. This is assuming that Trump wins Georgia, which right now I would say no, he probably does not win Georgia. We look at Pennsylvania here. Let's take a look at the early vote. Keep in mind the early vote for Pennsylvania is only mail-in ballots. Right now, the Democrats have a massive advantage, but we have to compare it to 2020. In 2020, the Democrats held 65% of the early vote. Compared to 2016, the Democrats hold 58%. This is a loss for the Democrats. The Republicans are surging in the early vote in Pennsylvania. But the vote type you have to keep in mind is mail-in ballots. What happened in 2020? It was COVID year. The only way to vote early in Pennsylvania is through mail-in ballots. We can go to this right now. We can look at this. We can go to vote type, 100% mail-in ballots. In 2020, there was a pandemic. Democrats voted by mail mostly because of the pandemic. After the pandemic's over, 2024, now they're starting to return to the polls. A lot of Democrats will probably turn out on Election Day. I will say this, that the early vote data in Pennsylvania doesn't look particularly good for Kamala Harris right now, but I'm sure that she will probably be fine. I think that Kamala Harris will win the state of Pennsylvania very narrowly. Very narrowly. I wouldn't say that a Trump win is impossible. I would not say that right now. I would say that it is more likely that there is a Harris win, but I would not discount Trump's chances in Pennsylvania. But when you look at the early vote coming in, it looks really bad for Trump in Wisconsin. It looks really bad for Trump in Michigan. And it looks a little bit more favorable to Trump in Pennsylvania. But I would say that's a fluke, and I would say that probably changes by Election Day. The problem with Trump is because the data looks really bad in Wisconsin and Michigan, these 3 states have voted together in every single election since 1988 when Dukakis won Wisconsin. Since 1988. These Rust Belt trio states, the WIMPA states, have voted together The same candidate, they've voted for the same candidate every year for the past 40 years. That is an insane metric. That is an insane voting streak. And I don't think that will change. I think these 3 states will be voting together. And because of Harris's surge in Wisconsin and Michigan, I have a hard time seeing her losing Pennsylvania as well. I think that Harris will win this election by 270 electoral votes, but that's not it. That's not the only reason why I have Harris winning the election. This is based off of the data, but let's take a look at some of their unconventional ways of predicting the president. We have the 13 Keys tracker, which has gotten 9 of the 10 presidential elections correct. Now, depending on how you view it, maybe it is not 10 out of 10 if you think 2000 was a fluke, but for the sake of the argument, let's assume it has gotten 9 out of 10 presidential elections correct. And now, yes, there are controversies with the 13 Qs model. It is not perfect. There are some contradictions from Alan Lichtman, but this model has been right more than it has been wrong. There is no denying that. Midterm gains, that T was declared false. No primary contest, true, because Kamala Harris did win over 2/3, or at least 2/3, of the delegate votes in the Democratic primary. In T3, that's false because Biden dropped out of the race. No third party, RFK dropped out. So that T has to be true. These 2 keys are based off of economic metrics. These are based off of true-false statements. These 2 keys have definitive answers to them. The strong-term economy key, or the strong short-term economy key, is true. There is no recession going on in the term. There has not been a recession in Biden's term, so that has to be true. And the long-term economy also has to be true. Major policy change, I would say that Biden did have some major policy change over the Trump administration by reversing a lot of the stuff that Trump did. No social unrest. Now, it depends on how you look at it, but right now I would say there is not social unrest. I would say there is no social unrest right now. So I would put that key in Biden's favor. Now, maybe in the summer there was, you could argue, but I don't think there is any right now. And not many people are really talking about the Palestinian protests right now, like they were in 2020 with the BLM protest or in 2016 with the BLM protest. Not many people are talking about the pro-Palestine protests now. No scandal. Now, it depends on how you look at it. It really does depend on how you look at this. But I would say that the key is probably true by Lichtman's metric of having a bipartisan recognition of serious impropriety. Now, there are arguments to say that Lichtman has used this no scandal key in the past, not for criminal scandal, and it hasn't been bipartisan. You look at Ulysses S. Grant. I believe there was or maybe it wasn't Ulysses S. Grant, or it was another president, where they had a scandal, but it wasn't really a criminal scandal. It was more of just a scandal within the administration that wasn't on the president himself. There are arguments to be made about that. The railroad scandal, I believe, was not on the president himself. Lichtman still turned the key false. Now, you can say that maybe them covering up Biden's age and deterioration was a scandal. Maybe you can say that Hunter Biden is a scandal, but let's say that the key is true, because most of the time in those situations it would have been declared true. So let's say the key is true. Now, foreign or military failure, this key is 100% false, and success. Despite what Lichtman says, I also agree that this key is just false. Charismatic incumbent, they have this key is false. Biden is not charismatic, and neither is Harris. And then uncharismatic challenger, Lichtman says that Trump is charismatic, but only to a sliver or a small base. Now, I have problems with the keys. I do. I think there are a lot of problems with the keys that I could probably make a video about, but it is undeniable that right now Harris is winning the 13 keys model. Another reason why I think Kamala Harris will probably end up winning this election is because of the Taylor Swift endorsement. Now, I know that a lot of people may not think that this will have an influence on the election, but I think it will. I think this endorsement will energize a lot of Swift supporters or Swifties to vote for Kamala Harris. It's undoubtable the amount of influence Taylor Swift has on this election. It would be like comparable to if Mr. Beast endorsed a candidate in this election. She has influence. It's undoubtable to say that there will be people that will vote just because of Swift's endorsement, for better or for worse, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing. Also, many celebrities have come out in support of Kamala Harris. Beyonce did. Jennifer Lopez did. Jennifer Lawrence did, Robert Downey Jr. did. There's a lot of celebrities that have just come out in droves for Kamala, and I'm not saying that those celebrities are the ones shifting the electorate right now. In 2020, they came out for Biden. It was still close. In 2016, they came out for Clinton. Trump obviously won. But what I am saying is that Taylor Swift has not endorsed a candidate, I don't believe, officially endorsed a candidate besides, in the Senate or whatever. I don't believe she's endorsed a candidate for president before. I don't think so. And in this election, she endorsed Harris. And I think that that is a problem that Trump is probably going to have, and that will affect Trump in the polls. Now, I'm not to say that this is going to be the only reason why Trump will lose or why Harris will win. That would be stupid to say that this is the only reason, but I do think this is a contributing factor. Now, let's get to another reason why I think Donald Trump will likely lose. Now, it's very easy to compare 2020 to 2024. It's super easy. You have literally one of the candidates, Donald Trump, being on the ballot, and it's easy to say the polls underestimate Trump. The polls clearly underestimate Trump in 2020 and in 2016. It's very easy to point to that. You look at any of the swing states, and usually they are wrong. In 2020, we expected Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to vote for Biden by upwards of 7 to 10 points. They did not do that. In 2016, they were expected to vote for Clinton by 6 or 7 points. They voted for Trump. You can take the data from a lot of states. In 2020, Biden was expected to win Florida. He didn't do that. In 2020, Biden was expected to win North Carolina. He didn't do that. And it's very easy to say that and be like, oh, the polls are going to underestimate Trump this time around. But that's not how polling works. In fact, I would argue that the polling right now is actually probably more favorable to Trump than it is to Kamala. How polling works is they essentially have to decide who is going to vote in this election. This is how polling works. They have to make a decision based on the sample size. The sample size has to try to figure out who's going to vote in this election. In this election, what they are probably doing in the generic vote is they're probably thinking Republicans are more likely to vote this year. This is what happened in 2022. Of course, they were wrong. Everyone said that 2022 would be a red wave. And so the polls said, yeah, there'll probably be more Republicans, so let's see what they think. It's the same thing. In the summer of this year, Trump was heavily favored to win in terms of polling, in terms of betting markets, so they are betting on the fact that Republicans will turn out to vote more. You look at the polls that have been released. The polling is probably underestimating Harris's chances, in my opinion. It's because they are trying, in their sample, they are trying to have more Republicans, and that's why all the polls are having a Republican lead or having it very close. I think it is underestimated Harris, and that's the problem in 2020 and 2016. They expected Democrats to turn out to vote because Clinton was viewed as the favorite, Biden was viewed as the favorite. Because of that, they underestimated Trump. And I think it's the same story here. I think it's because they expect Trump to win, or they expect Trump voters to turn out. The polling then reflects that. And I think that's just a general problem in this election that Trump is going to have, is that the polls will probably be wrong again. And I do think, because the polls support him right now, that because the polls are leaning towards him, they will probably be a little bit more favorable to Harris than they will be to Trump. That's why it's not really wise to compare 2024 to 2020, because it's different environments. Right now, the national environment is definitely Republican leaning. People don't really like the Biden-Harris administration. It is they're underwater in terms of their job approval ratings. They're underwater in terms of their just general approval. Biden-Harris is deeply unpopular in the United States. So the polling expects that Trump voters will turn out, and they sample Republicans more than they do Democrats. But the problem with that is that we don't know whether Republicans will actually turn out. We don't know. And that's why I think that the polls are actually underestimating Harris. You also just take a look at what's changed between 2020 and 2024. Since then, you've had Trump deny the 2020 election results. Now, I'm a Republican. I'm supporting Trump, but you can't deny that Donald Trump did lose the 2020 election. Every single one of his court cases were found false. I know that some of the voting in Michigan may have seemed sus at the time, but it was not fraud. It has been proven time and time again that it was not fraud. 2020 was a legitimate election. It was not stolen. You had Trump deny the election. He continues to do so, which is not a popular thing to do. It's not. I don't know why people think that election denialism is somehow going to help Trump just because polls say that, I don't know, 50% or 40% say that the 2020 election was stolen. You have to take a look at what happened as a result of that. Whether you like it or not, January 6th, United States Capitol attack was blamed on Trump. The media pinned it to Trump. Now, whether or not you want to say that's been forgotten, I don't think independent voters have forgotten about this. I really don't. I think that maybe they think about their bank accounts, they think about grocery prices a lot more than this, but I don't think they have completely forgotten about the January 6th United States Capitol attack. Now, I will say I don't believe that Trump incited this insurrection. I don't believe it is Trump's fault this happened, but the media has pinned it to him. And I think the independent voters have probably pinned it to him as well. And they are going to be thinking about this. You also have the felony convictions of former President Trump in the Manhattan trial, being found guilty of 34 counts, 34 charges in a, quote, scheme to illegally influence the 2016 election. Now, whether or not you agree with it, the optics are bad here. The optics are really bad here, and it's something that the Democrats have ran on, the fact that Trump is a felon. I don't think many people will be able to see past that. I don't think many people are going to really view this with nuance or say, like, oh, but it was like kind of a rigged trial, which it was. It was a rigged trial, and we know that. But I don't believe that the majority of Americans see it that way. And I think that just creates problems when Trump has to appeal to these independents in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin. And I think we're seeing that in the early vote data here, that Trump is just not, it's just not working. It's just not working for him as well as he wants it to be. And I think that if Trump is to win this election right now, if he wants to win, I think that his decision to not campaign in the final days of the election in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, is instead focusing on campaigning in New Mexico and Virginia, two extremely Harris-lean states who will probably win them by a likely margin, maybe by like 5 to 10% in both. His decision to campaign in those states on the final days of the election is not a smart decision. It's not. You have to remember back in 2016, for a couple months, Hillary did not visit Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania because they were viewed as Republican favorites. In those couple months that Hillary Clinton didn't visit those states, Trump was only able to win them very narrowly. Obviously, Kamala is putting her full attention into these states. I think that Kamala Harris will probably win these states because of that. You have to remember in 2016, Clinton was focusing on states like Ohio, states like Florida. She wasn't worried about these states, so she didn't even visit them. And in the last few days of the presidential election, for Trump not to be visiting Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, I would not be surprised if that costs him the election. If this election were hindered on a few thousand votes in Pennsylvania, but because Trump didn't visit there in the last few days, that's the reason why he lost to Harris there. I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's an idiotic move by his campaign, as was allowing the comedian Tony Hinchcliffe to say those remarks about Puerto Rico. Whether you want to say that's Trump's fault or not, I don't think Trump knew that guy. I don't think it's Trump's fault. The optics, though, were horrible for him. They were horrible for him. There are voters in Pennsylvania, a great many of them are Latino or they are Puerto Rican, and they saw that clip. And I know that they're a little bit more skeptical of voting Trump than they probably were before. Now, whether you want to say that, oh, they were probably going to vote for Trump anyways, it doesn't really matter. You can say that. But I say, even if it has an effect on a couple thousand voters, this is a state that Trump may only win by a few thousand votes. We go to 2020. We go here to 2020. Trump or Biden won this state by 1.2% of the vote. I believe that translates to 100,000 votes about. Maybe a little bit under 100,000 votes. That translates to 2016. You look at the data. Trump won this by 0.72% of the vote. This is a state that's decided by a few 100,000 votes, maybe, or a couple, 100,000 or so votes. The state's going to be decided by. Trump needs every vote he can get. And even if a couple switch, that's not good news. You look at Polymarket here, Trump is losing momentum in the betting markets. Harris is gaining the momentum back from President Trump. Look at how much this percentage has dropped. This percentage started this week at about like 67-ish%. It has now dropped down to 61%. Trump is losing the momentum in this election, and I think it shows. And I think that Trump is unfortunately heading towards a loss on November 5th. I think that Harris will unfortunately become the 47th president of the United States. It's technically not too late for this to change, but with the way things are seeming right now, I think that Harris will probably be the 47th president and will be sworn in on January 20th, 2025. I just think that's the case. If you disagree with me, you're welcome to. I would just say this. I got my hopes up in 2022 for the midterms. It didn't go so well. I wouldn't get my hopes up in 2024 either. Especially when you have a lot of metrics that are supporting Kamala Harris, like the stock market. The stock market's been doing pretty well. Usually, when the stock market does well in the few months before an election, the incumbent party wins. If not, the challenging party wins. Well, looks like the stock market's been doing pretty well, so it's not boding well for Trump to win this election. And I think Harris is probably the underdog. I would still say that Trump is the favorite right now, but it's not looking good for him, and things need to either change, but it honestly very well might be too late. Overall, how I think the election will probably go is I think Kamala Harris will probably narrowly win Georgia as of right now. She will win Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia very narrowly. Trump will win Nevada, Arizona, and North Carolina. I can see Trump winning Georgia for sure. I would probably give it a 55% Harris wins it, 45% Trump wins it. If I had to say right now, Pennsylvania, I would give a 65% Harris wins it, 35% Trump wins it. The other states, I think that I'm about 80% confident that Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina will vote for Trump. Wisconsin and Michigan will vote for Harris. Can say with probably maybe about 60%, 70% confidence that Kamala Harris will win this election. And yeah, this is my final prediction. That's all I have to say. Go vote.